Well, this is episode number 3 of Discipleship Directives with Dr. Dan Crawford. It's good to have you this morning, and thank you for joining us. Dr. Crawford, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great today.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And we are coming in between your travels to South Texas, but specifically this last month, we're in November now, this last month of October, as you came down and spent time with the pastors, you spoke of several ingredients of prayer. We're continuing the conversation on prayer, obviously. And you mentioned of the word travail. We would like for you to, if you don't mind, to expand a little bit more on the subject.
Sure. That's kind of a lost word. It's a good word. It's a biblical word. It's in the Bible 49 times, but in English, we've just sort of lost that word. I don't hear anybody talking about travail, except when it's used for a woman who is 9 months pregnant and she's having difficulty delivering the child. And sometimes the word is used there. And it's also a biblical word. In the Bible, it talks about women who travail in childbirth. And of course, in the Old Testament, childbirth was a whole lot different from the way it is now. But they were travailing, and the word means hard labor. But it means more than that. It means painful, hard labor. So you can see why the majority of the uses of travail in the Bible had to do with the delivery of a child. But it also talks about travailing prayer. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane prevailed in prayer until the sweat on his brow turned to drops of blood. That's something that we don't do. I've never met anybody who said their sweat turned to blood in the middle of their prayer time, but it was a word that described Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Paul used that word several times. Hezekiah travailed in prayer. Isaiah travailed in prayer. Hannah travailed in prayer. The psalmist used the word many times in reference to communicating with God. And one of my favorite characters in the New Testament is Epaphras, or Epaphras, some would say. In Colossians 4:12, Paul describes him as always laboring earnestly in prayer. That's the idea of travail. It's a serious kind of praying. It says to God, we're going to pray till the prodigal comes home. We're going to pray till the marriage is saved. We're going to pray until healing happens. It's that kind. In fact, some people have said when Jesus talked about asking, seeking, and knocking, that was an intensity kind of praying, that asking is rather simple. Seeking is a little more complex. Knocking gets to the point of travail. The word is substituted sometimes for weeping in prayer, wrestling in prayer, striving in prayer. So it's a good word. It's just a word that's kind of disappeared from our vocabulary, but it's a good ingredient of prayer, that sometimes we do work hard, painful in prevailing prayer.
The podcast is called Discipleship Directives, and you are reminding me when you bring this teaching on prayer that it is obviously one of those disciplines in the Christian life, in the discipleship process. And I'm bringing this up to you as we listen to your teaching, and obviously last month also when you came down to South Texas. Would it be possible that maybe potentially, the reason why we struggle with this definition and this encounter through prayer is because we have this preconceived mindset that prayer is supposed to do exactly the opposite, to alleviate my pain, where in reality, prayer shapes our walk with Christ. So help us understand, because again, many of us, we make the mistake to utilize prayer simply as get me a free ticket or type of loophole to get me out of the situation, where most of the time, or many times, I'm just listening to the examples you gave us, and I'm thinking of the shaping of the lives of these individuals, even to the person of Christ, that at the end of the day, it was that connection, it was the person that he was praying to. So how do we balance, Dr. Dan, on this issue, on preconceived idea that prayer is supposed to be a quick fix to my pain, where now prayer becomes the shaping of my life into a disciple, into the image of Jesus?
I think it was Oswald Chambers, but I may not get this quote attributed to the right person. Could have been E.M. Bounds. One of them said, or somebody said, prayer does not prepare you for the work. Prayer is the work. And I think that kind of what you're hitting at is that sometimes we say, well, we'll just pray and everything will be okay, and the work will get done and the pain will go away and the prodigal will come home, and but prayer is the work.
Mm. 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 Wow. And again, if the purpose of the podcast and the purpose of being under your teaching for the last few months in South Texas, and I know through the years, because you've been doing this for many, many years and written so many resources on the issue, is that we could, this is kind of at the goal, this is kind of at the idea, if we could embrace some of this principle before we need them, especially when it comes to the work of prayer, when it comes to the building the habitual practice of these disciplines that are extremely, extremely important. And speaking of habits and speaking of building life, personally in your life, you've been on the road. I don't know. It seems to me that you are on the going a lot. And just tell us, how do you keep this discipline so tangible and so in front of you, even as you continue to serve the Lord in multiple places?
Well, I have been on the road a lot. Lately, I've driven a little over 3,000 miles, and I think I've slept in 5 motel beds and preached and taught and had meals with people and coffee. And then on top of all that, I ended up driving 325 miles to officiate a funeral because it wasn't near an airport, and the deceased had requested that I be a part of the service. And so just on the road a lot. And I sometimes blame my parents. My mother was a perfectionist. My father was a workaholic. Now you put those two together, and what you get is me. I just, that's what I do. And I had a high school baseball coach that loved to say to us, "Don't die on third." And he was talking about baseball, and he was obviously talking about, don't get thrown out on third base. You got to score. If you get that far, we need the run. Mm-hmm. But it had a bigger meaning to some of us. And I think in my ministry, I've kind of incorporated that. I don't want to die on third. Mm. Now, to mix my metaphors with Paul's, I want to run the full course. I want to finish the race. I want to slide into home plate. Mm-hmm. I don't want to die on third. So I don't know how I do it. I just keep going. And, somebody said, you're like that Dalmatian dog at the fire station. Every time the bell rings, you jump on the truck and off you go again. But that's, I don't know how I manage. When I retired from the seminary position, my faculty position, I asked God to give me another life verse. I've had several, but I thought transitioning into semi-retirement, or what I like to say, retiring from a position, but not from a calling, I asked God for a new verse. And the verse that I came across was Psalm 71:8, which says, "Now when I'm old and gray-headed, O Lord, do not forsake me until I declare your strength to this generation and your power to everyone who is to come." So all I know is that God hasn't forsaken me, and as long as the bell keeps ringing, I'll keep jumping on the truck, I guess. And we are forever grateful that you remain obedient, and in spite of the challenges and whatever may come, you are faithful to that calling, which is translated into faithfulness towards exercising precisely what God has given you. And whatever your parents did back in those formative years, it worked. So we're grateful for that. At the same time, we want to also take advantage, obviously, in this, what we're doing even today,
of all these tools, technology that allows us to shrink distances and give us the access to communicate and continue conversations, which in this case you mentioned the semi-retirement and retirement, and you're back and forth with some of these words, but where are you on that spectrum? I mean, I know you're traveling, you're doing a lot of things that you enjoy to do, but tell us about your retirement. You've done it multiple times, for what I understand.
I have. I retired from the seminary faculty in 2007 on schedule, not encouraged by anyone in particular. In fact, I went to see the president of the seminary and I said, I'm old enough to retire. I've got the money, and what do you want me to do? And he said, well, whatever you want to do. And I said, well, I ask you first. So he said, well, whatever you want to do. So I retired from the position of professor at the seminary, but not from the calling. I had no intentions to just stop ministering. I had a next door neighbor who retired, not from the ministry, but retired from his job. He had nothing to do. All he ever did when he came out of the house was chip golf balls in the backyard, and he died. And I said, that's not me. So shortly after I retired, I went to work for the Northwest Baptist, not Northwest, the West Coast Baptist Association, which is Vancouver and Vancouver Island, Canada. And they put me on the staff with no salary, which is fine with me. But I made 6 trips a year to Vancouver I was doing vision tours. I was mentoring young pastors. I had taken a group of students for 18 years, a group of 10 students every year to Vancouver to study urban evangelism. And 16 of them had gone back to either start a church or become a campus minister or something. And so when I retired from the seminary, they said, you can't leave us up here. So I went back 6 times a year to mentor those that I had a part in sending, and to introduce pastors and missions ministers and so forth to what they might partner with those that are working in Canada. I retired from that last November. 2 weeks later in December, I got a call from your friend and mine, Robert Rodriguez. And he said, we need you in the Valley. So they gave me a new title. I got a new job in another one of those no salary jobs, by the way. But that's fine. I've got a retirement income. So I'm back. I guess I'm getting pretty close to full time with what we're doing.
So were you doing kind of the same thing that you're doing right now back in Vancouver? In a sense?
I wasn't doing any teaching.
Okay.
It was strictly, well, if I was taking a vision tour, then we drove around and I introduced them to a lot of church planters and ministers, and with hopes that their church would partner with whoever it was in Canada. Wow. And then I was doing a lot of mentoring. I'd have breakfast with one person, coffee in the morning with another, lunch with another, afternoon coffee with another person, and then dinner with maybe a husband and wife this time. And so I was mentoring 4 or 5, maybe 6 people a day. And I would do that for a week and then come back home.
Well, the Lord positioned you in a place where definitely I can only imagine. I've never been in Vancouver, but I can only imagine some of these contexts where you were and where you served and the individuals that you mentor. Obviously, it's a very unique place. I will argue that those places are ahead of United States and Latin America in a sense of just the progressiveness and the sense of even the secularism to a certain degree. Sure. But all that to say that it seems to me that the Lord has placed you, whatever he has placed you, you've been able to reintroduce these principles of discipleship. And therefore, our investment this morning, just communicating the message, which in this case has been on prayer. And now that you have transitioned and you graciously accepted the invitation from Robert and the folks from VBMEC, Valley Baptist Missionary Education Center, to come and serve alongside with the pastors down here, I can assure you I never met anyone from Vancouver, but I can assure you, the folks down here, you have and you continue to make an impact on the lives of these individuals, especially these pastors and families, and by default, the ripple effect of churches. And I want to say thank you again. Thank you for making yourself available. One of the things that I want to also remind everyone that part of this ministry and part of what you have done throughout the years is basically to put your thoughts into a written format by producing and writing books. And Robert Rodriguez, again, through the ministry of VVMEC, has facilitated many of these books to our pastors, for which, again, we are very, very grateful. And I want to remind everybody that those books are available as well. Now, before I let you go,
in Spanish, and they've been translated into
definitely.
Spanish.
Well, yeah, and for anyone who may not know where VVMEC is and where we are, we're in deep South Texas. I was speaking to folks. I spent the weekend in close to the Uvalde area, Pearsall, in that area in south of San Antonio. And I was reminding them, I said, hey, I know this is South Texas, but I come from deep South Texas because I'm in the border. I'm just a few miles from Mexico. And obviously, your book's being also translated into Spanish. That's also a gift. Speaking of South Texas, you are coming back to join us at the end of this month, and it's right after Thanksgiving, actually, the Thanksgiving break, and you'll be down here on Tuesday, the 29th of November, coming back to Brother Denny Anderson's church at First Baptist in Rio Hondo, which is kind of a spot for pastors to come and gather. So please give us just a brief preview. What is to come at the end of the month?
Well, we're going to be continuing to talk about prayer in that meeting on November 29th, and some of the responses that God gives. And the question is often asked, if God already knows everything, then why am I praying? If God has it all planned out, then why am I asking for things? And we will talk about that on November the 29th. There are some biblical examples of people who appeared, at least from human vision, appeared to change God's mind. Jonah would be one, comes to mind quickly. We'll talk about him and some others. Does our prayer really change God's mind, or does it just look that way from our perspective? We'll discuss that. It's a question that comes up, and if pastors don't ask it themselves, they have to answer it for people in their congregations who sometimes say, if God already knows the answer, why am I bothering him with praying?
Mm-hmm. That's an amazing question. Obviously, he has come up a lot in our conversations as pastors, as church leaders, at a personal level. Definitely plays a major, major role. And again, these are some of the principles, some of the questions that in the ideal world, we want to embrace the biblical worldview before we need them. The difficulty for many Christians is when we try to learn these principles in the midst of or after the matter, when the damage has been done, or the irreversible experience, whatever the case may be. And yet, here we are having this conversation, just again, bringing up this discipleship directives into hoping to continue the conversation this November. Do you have any final words for us as we close our podcast today?
Well, we're getting close to Thanksgiving. Just be thankful. We have much to be thankful, much for which to be thankful, and enjoy the festivities, I guess. And I'll see you on the 29th of November in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas.
And I want to remind everyone that we do broadcast those presentations, and it's about an hour and a half or so presentation over this material. So one of the ways that you guys can keep up with what is taking place, a couple of ways that you can do that, and we'll post this on the show notes. It's going to be the website, discipleallnations.org, disciple, just one word, discipleallnations, one word, .org. And also, whatever you are either watching or listening to this broadcast, we will be very, very grateful if you guys either subscribe or you share the broadcast today. We want to make sure that we are, coming into the conversation. And if you guys have any questions, any comments on that, we will appreciate those as well. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you guys next time on Discipleship Directives together as we continue the conversation. God bless.